Joel.
Oh,
Thanks, Joel.
yeah. Stay online again. Bye.
And then
I need to be on call. Yeah, I need the earphone.
So the questions are going to be coming in from.
yeah, I think on the phone. I think
On the phone,
so.
huh?
I've got questions coming in on here, right? Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Just go on to
I've
your
got on.
talk show.
Yes, I've got this one here.
Yeah, the question will be on here. You can
So it says
openly
discussion.
like look at the thing casual, no
Okay.
problem. Don't need
Yep.
to be like stressed out, and you can help him look as well. I will invite you to the talk show. Actually, you are in already, so I just post the WhatsApp in WhatsApp.
Okay. So also in WhatsApp as well.
Yeah,
Okay,
I will
sure.
send to you.
Yeah, maybe if you can put it on the WhatsApp, it'd be easier for me because sometimes they have, more. They have the Facebook site, and then there's another site.
Yeah,
so
I'll do
Zoom. Yeah, if you just put it on here, we'll have a look. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
So which camera again? This one.
Right camera, always this one.
Always this one. So
For
just
you.
direct.
Yeah.
Okay. And then for Pastor Kojo, this one.
Yeah.
Okay.
So the questions are
Good morning. Welcome to online church on the 5th of July 2020. My name is Henry. I'll be your medical doctor host for today. And I also have joining with me today Pastor Kojo Akomeah. And we together will be sharing on today's topic, which is on cancer and medical treatment. And Pastor Kojo will be sharing a spiritual message on forgiveness today. So I'm just going to go straight into my talk today on cancer and medical treatment. Now, cancer is a very emotive word. When we hear the word cancer, it immediately strikes fear in our heart because cancer means a battle. It means that we're going to be fighting against a disease, an unknown or unseen disease. Cancer means facing mortality, facing challenges, facing treatment. Cancer is a emotive word because we all know someone in our life who's been affected by cancer, a family member or even a friend. And in my line of work, I am a surgeon. I work in Melbourne, Australia. In my line of work, I've met all sorts of people that have been affected by cancer. Mothers, fathers, brothers, sisters, professionals, students, the elderly and the young. And as soon as we start discussing this topic of cancer, I immediately see a fear inside their heart. So that's why today I'm going to be talking a bit about cancer and medical treatment. I'm going to be going through what cancer is, what are its causes, what are some of the treatments for cancer, and what should I do if I or a family member is diagnosed with cancer. I hope to explore these topics because if we can understand some of the background for cancer, it can hopefully give us some more reassurance about the treatments and more reassurance about what holds in store for someone who is being treated for cancer. Now, cancer has unfortunately affected millions of people around the world. In 2018, it's estimated that 9.5 million people will be affected and will unfortunately die from cancer. And this is on the rise. In 2040, according to the World Health Organization website, up to 16.3 million people will die from cancer. And we can see from this map, also from the World Health Organization, that cancer is a worldwide disease. Currently, we can see the incidence rate, or the number of people that are newly diagnosed with cancer, is mainly concentrated in Western countries, in places like North America, Europe, and Australia. But cancer is also rapidly growing in places like Asia and Africa. And the reason for this is because the causes for cancer are becoming more widespread, and people are also living longer, which means that the effects of long age and the effects of lifestyle diseases are coming into effect to cause this disease. When we look at the top causes of death due to cancer, these are very different to the top incidence or the top diagnosis for cancer. The reason why is because we now have a variety of effective treatments. So we can see on one side where it says incidence, that lung cancer is still the most #1 diagnosed cancer in the world, and it has a very high mortality. But when we go down to something like breast cancer, we can see that although it is diagnosed in a large number of people, the number of deaths caused by breast cancer is not as high as lung cancer, and that is because of effective treatments and a greater understanding we have in modern medicine of how we can tackle this disease. Similarly, with things such as liver cancer or stomach cancer, these are still very aggressive cancers, and the treatments are not as effective, which is why the death rate for these type of cancers are much higher. So let's now go into understanding what is cancer. What is our modern medical view of what cancer is, and how does this affect its treatments? Now, cancer comes from the ancient word crab, which is an ancient Greek word. And it comes from there because the Greek observed breast cancer starting off as a single focus within the breast and then spreading out in a crab-like fashion to different parts of the breast. When they observed this, they thought it looked like a crab, and that's where the word cancer came from. In modern day, we now understand cancer on a cellular level, on individual cells within the body. Initially, these cells can have mutations or genetic changes within the cell. This might be 1 or 2 genetic changes, and often the body can clear these abnormal cells. But what can happen is that certain cells can gather 1, 2, 3, and multiple genetic changes, and this causes the cells to change. This causes the cells to become rapidly dividing cells, and cells that not only divide uncontrollably, but they also begin to invade. Now, cancer is described by the part of the body that it originates from. And so, for example, stomach cancer the cells originate from the stomach. So that's why we call it stomach cancer. Similarly for the colon, for the esophagus, for the brain, and for the breast. And this constitutes a constellation of diseases which we ultimately call cancer. Cancer, though, can be described as either benign or malignant, and it's only when it reaches the malignant phase do we describe it medically as the word cancer. Prior to that, though, we call these abnormal cells tumours. These tumours, when they grow, when the cells divide, if they are contained within a certain part of the body and don't spread, then this is called a benign tumour. The cells themselves are abnormal, but these cells do not invade to other parts of the body. When they do develop that invasive potential, then they can break through the natural barriers and therefore spread into other organs. They then can even travel through the bloodstream, and when they travel through the bloodstream and seed in other organs, that's what we call malignant. When these cells become a systemic disease, that is what the medical term is cancer. Also in modern medicine, we have now been able to identify that cancerous cells grow in clones, in clusters and groups. These groups might originate in a certain part of the body, as we can see on this slide, the pancreas, and then certain focus or different types of cells can develop clones, and these clones can then develop different potential to invade or spread. And modern medicine has been able to analyze the genetic changes within cells that spread to other parts of the body. And they find that these cells, although they originate from the original tumor itself, they have developed different types of genetic changes to allow it to spread to other parts of the body. We also can see that between different foci or different lesions of metastasis within other parts of the body, that the cells are actually slightly different on a genetic level. Also, when we analyze cancer in different patients, again, we see genetic differences between the cancerous cells in different patients. What this means is that cancer is a very complex disease, that on the microscopic and on the genetic level, cancer itself has a whole variety of ways that it can develop. And when it does develop, it can do a whole variety of different types of effects on the body. This also means that cancer treatment is also incredibly complex as well, and more than one treatment might be effective for certain patients. So what does cancer do? Cancer invades and surrounds organs, and when it surrounds a vital organ, then patients will feel the effect of that. For example, if a cancerous growth grows in the stomach, then that can strangle the intestines in the stomach and give people that sense of abdominal pain or difficulty eating. It can also invade and spread into other vital organs such as the lungs or even the heart that can cause changes to the breathing or changes to the circulation. Also, as mentioned, cancer can metastasize or spread to different parts of the body. When it causes a generalized spread, then that's what we call metastases. And this generalized spread can have an overwhelming effect on the body. And when that does occur, then patients can pass away from that. Finally, it can cause secondary effects. If cancer invades into a blood vessel or an organ that has a lot of blood running through it, then this can cause effects such as bleeding. So often our treatments are involved in controlling these secondary effects as much as they are in trying to remove the cancer itself. What causes cancer? I'm going to go through this more in our talk next week, but this week we're just going to briefly go through some of the changes that can cause cancer. As mentioned, cancer originates from cells that have a genetic change. So it's quite easy for us to understand that things such as radiation, damaging substances such as smoking can actually affect the genetic makeup of cells and therefore cause these cells to divide rapidly and uncontrollably. But what we're also seeing, there's much more research going into lifestyle factors that cause cancer. Things such as obesity, nutrition, lack of exercise. All these factors are becoming more and more evident that these also affect the cells as well. And over long periods of time, these cells gather small genetic changes, unregulated, and therefore can cause cancer. So what should I do if I or a family member develops cancer? This is probably one of the most common questions that I get asked outside of the medical field and outside of the hospitals. And the first important point is to remember that around the world and in many healthcare systems, particularly in Australia and in Western countries, there are professionals that have dedicated their training and their main work into treating cancer. And these professionals are mainly in government-backed conventional hospitals. And so it's important to seek professional, conventional medical advice. As soon as the diagnosis is made, it's important to seek this treatment as soon as possible because many cancers are treatable, especially in early phase. There are a whole variety of treatments that can be possible, but these treatments are generally less toxic, less likely to affect the body if they are instituted at the early stages. So it's important to seek professional, conventional medical advice to do that at a time at the early stages of the cancer treatment. It's also very important to ask for help and support. Many studies have shown that survival is better for patients that have good social support. This is support from their family and their friends. Some people think that if they're diagnosed with cancer, then this is such an overwhelming feeling that they have and they want to hide it. They don't want to share this with their family and friends because they don't want them to worry. But in actual fact, having support of family and friends can help people go through the treatments and battle their cancer even better. Very often now, I see patients that come with one, two, even a few family members that come to the consultations, and we welcome that because we are able to interact not only with the patient, but with their whole support system, and their supports can ask questions, can think about other aspects of their treatment that maybe the patient may not understand or may not have thought about at the time. Two other points that are important to recognize if you or a family member develops cancer. First is to recognize that as with all aspects of health, not only is there a physical component, but there is a mental, social, and spiritual aspects to health as well. That cancer can affect the physical part of the body, but it also has a profound effect on our mental aspect. The worry, the stress, the uncertainty can affect the way that we view the world and the people around us, and it can also affect our outlook. It's important to recognize that there is a mental component to cancer as well, and it's important to have supports in that sphere. In the same way, social aspects are also very important. That when someone has cancer or is being treated for cancer, that profoundly affects their family, their work, and the people around them. Their friends, the way they interact with them completely changes. So therefore, social supports and knowing that your social life will be affected when cancer hits is very important. And finally, the spiritual aspect. Each one of us has a spiritual component. Each one of us has outlooks on life. Each one of us has thoughts about things greater than this life and greater than this world. And cancer can obviously affect that as well. In actual fact, some people have a sharpened spiritual focus when they go through their cancer treatments just because they are more sensitive to these types of things. In other patients, they find their spiritual life very lacking because of the worry and the stress and the physical things they're going through. It's important to understand there is a spiritual component to our health, and this spiritual component can affect our treatment and the way we tackle it. Finally, it's important to also plan ahead. Cancer treatments can take a long time. The medium and short term can take weeks to months to sometimes even years for their treatment. So it's important to plan ahead with your work, with your finances, with any legal aspects in your life, whether that might be your financial status or your work. These are things are important to consider and to get affairs in order when you're going through cancer treatment. Now let's go through the treatment options. Now there are a multitude of treatment options for cancer, and these are generally very specific to the type of cancer that is being diagnosed. But we can put them into some broad categories. And the first category is conventional treatment. This is treatment that is evidence-based, scientifically tested and backed, and proven to have outcomes. A lot of these treatments have had multiple clinical trials and outcomes that are evident and publicly available. And a lot of these type of treatments are ones where multiple people have gone through treatments in the past, and overall they have been proven to be effective. And these are the ones that are backed by governments, by hospitals, and by companies and agents. Conventional treatments lie in a variety of different things, and this is quite a complex slide, but I'm going to try to go through each component of conventional treatments in a small amount of detail. The first, which is my main area, is surgery. Surgery involves having an operation to remove either the cancer focus itself or the effects of the cancer and where it actually is. Surgery usually involves preparing the patient for a month in advance and recovering afterwards in order to remove usually the primary tumour or where the tumour has actually spread. This is generally only one component of the treatment, because often we put surgery together with these other components such as radiation treatment, chemotherapy, hormonal therapy, and a new area which is what we call targeted therapy. Now, although surgery can remove the primary focus of the tumour most often, sometimes we can't remove all of the cells because at the time of an operation we cannot actually remove the entire tumour, particularly the small microscopic deposits. So then we can rely on other means to remove those very small tumour cells that cannot be seen. So this is where radiation therapy can come into it. What radiation therapy is having high dose but very focused X-rays into a certain part of the body to mop up and to kill off those rapidly dividing cells. Those cells are generally very sensitive to X-rays, and generally these are the cells that can be affected by radiation therapy. Radiation therapy can also be used in other parts of the body where the tumour focus is known to be, and can be used to relieve symptoms, particularly in areas such as the bone or even the lungs. Next is chemotherapy. Chemotherapy has unfortunately gotten quite a bad rap, and that's because mainly of the side effects of chemotherapy. Chemotherapy involves infusing medications or drugs throughout the whole body, circulating this in order to target those rapidly dividing cells, which are the cancerous cells. But these also have a lot of secondary effects to affect other parts of the body that also have rapidly dividing cells. Chemotherapy is one of those types of treatments that can have effect on the whole body, which is why the side effects are generally quite profound. But modern medicine has been able to revise these side effects, and there's been a lot of studies into reducing side effects of chemotherapy, and nowadays most chemotherapies are generally well tolerated. Chemotherapy is also the type of treatment that can, because it is circulated through the entire body, it actually generally has quite the best effect in treating cancer, because it not only can affect where the cancer comes from, but anywhere the cancer might be in the entire body. Next is hormonal therapy. There are certain types of cancers that are very sensitive to hormones. Hormones are naturally occurring substances within the body, and cancer grows generally because of hormones. Certain agents, tablets, and other substances can be used to block these hormones and therefore stop the cancer from growing. This is generally used in the follow-up phases to prevent cancer from coming back again. Hormonal therapy also is, because it's another systemic type therapy, does have side effects. Finally, we come to targeted therapies, and targeted therapies are a relatively new group, only in the last 10 to 15 years, where certain substances have been developed that can target only the cancer cells or only certain types of cells within the body. This makes it much more effective because it only affects the tumour itself, wherever it is in the body, but is less likely to have these side effects. And these targeted therapies now have quite profound results. And we can see from targeted therapies, cancers that we once thought were untreatable and uncurable are now almost gone. So often though with these treatments, it's not only one treatment that we use multimodal therapies in order to treat cancer. And that is because, as mentioned earlier, cancer is a very complex disease, that it begins in one part of the body, it can spread, there's multiple genetic changes, and there's multiple things that cancer cells can do. So therefore we often combine these treatments either sequentially or even at the same time in order to battle the cancer. This is the first group, which is what we call conventional therapies. There's also another group, which is what we call complementary therapies. These are treatments that are used often together with conventional therapies, but they are in this category because they don't have the same scientific backing or the same evidence base to them. A lot of these treatments have been proven to be effective, but whether these effective is enough to cure the cancer or make the cancer go away completely is still yet to be proven. And complementary therapies are recommended by medical professionals because they work together with conventional therapies with minimal side effects and minimal interaction. Now, some of these things include massage, meditation, art therapy, music therapy, exercise, even acupuncture have been seen as a complementary therapy. And these are things that work very well together with conventional therapy, helping to relieve side effects and even enhancing some of the mental, social, and spiritual components to the cancer that the conventional types of treatments can't do. And these are ones that are important to discuss with your doctor or with medical professionals if they're also going to be used, because it's important that the medical professionals do know exactly what other treatments are being chosen by patients or chosen by yourself, so then they can understand more clearly what the types of treatments each patient is receiving as they tackle their cancer. Finally, the last group is what we call alternative treatments. Now, alternative treatments are categorized in this way because they are used instead of conventional treatments. Alternative therapies do not have the scientific backing by definition. They do not have the proven outcomes as seen in conventional therapies. This doesn't say that they don't work though, but they are yet to have that proven background to them. These include things such as homeopathy, megavitamins, and herbal type treatments. Alternative therapies are often given by people who are not necessarily trained in medical profession through a recognized government institute. They also can sometimes be given by recommendations from others. Now, the reason why alternative therapies have been popular is because sometimes conventional therapies actually don't work. Also, sometimes these treatments are given because people think that they're more natural, or they do not have chemicals, or they're not processed. And often patients just want to feel more in charge of their decisions, and they want to look widely or more broadly at their treatment options. Now, alternative therapies are not necessarily condemned by medical professionals. In actual fact, it is very important that if alternative therapies are chosen by patients, that the medical professionals in the hospitals or do know about these choices. And it's important to know because very often alternative therapies can have side effects. These side effects can affect the patient directly or even can interact with conventional treatments. So if you or a family member decides to choose alternative treatments, it's important to be well informed about them. What are they exactly? What side effects can they give? And what do these alternative therapies do, and can they interact with conventional treatments? And these alternative treatments are ones where professionals might not even know about them. And so it's good to have that information so that can be shared. Finally, cancer, as I mentioned at the start of the talk, is quite an emotive term, because not only can it affect individuals, but it can affect groups of people, families, social groups. And cancer has that effect because it affects the individual and the way and who they are and how they interact with others. Cancer itself is one of those topics which, if treated properly and treated well, people can actually overcome it and live even more productive lives because they've overcome such great difficulty in overcoming their cancer. And so that's why when we talk about cancer and its treatments, I welcome discussion, questions that you can post online as we continue this talk. And as you do your questions, try to think a little bit about the treatments. What sort of treatments would you like to know more about? What sort of aspects of cancer treatment have you experienced or have other people experienced in the past that we are able to discuss? And how can these treatments, in actual fact, be more effective as time goes on? Now, that's the end of my component of the talk. I now want to introduce Pastor Kojo, who will be talking to us a bit about some spiritual aspects related a bit to cancer, and also about how cancer really brings certain types of emotions and types of things to the forefront. And Pastor Kojo, I know that you've had some experience as well in chaplaincy, in working as a pastor in Australia, in the UK, in America, and overseas. Yeah, maybe tell us a little bit about yourself first before you go into your talk today.
Right, thanks, Dr. Henry. So I've been really blessed by your presentation. So I'm Pastor Kojo, like Dr. Henry said. I've been here in Australia for about 10 years, and I work with one of the universities here in Melbourne as a chaplain, and I tend to interact a lot with the students, and I like working with young people. So that's what I do.
Oh, great. Okay. Yeah. Well, we look forward to hearing what you're going to share with us today.
Right. Thanks, Henry. So basically, I was thinking about what to share with us today, and as I was thinking, I thought, well, Dr. Henry is going to be talking to us about cancer, and I thought, yes, we need to hear a lot about cancer. We've got the COVID situation that's taken over, but obviously cancer is still a disease that we're battling with, isn't it?
Mm.
Right. So what I want to share today is it's not anything that is particularly new, but let me begin by saying this. I believe it was George Herbert, the English poet and priest, who said that he who cannot forgive breaks the bridge over which he himself must pass. Have you broken any bridges in your life? Is there someone in your life that you've not been able to forgive? Are there people in your life that you're struggling to forgive? One of the most fascinating stories in all the Bible is the story that Jesus told in Matthew chapter 18. In Matthew chapter 18, Jesus relates a story. And the story is so fascinating. But before I tell you that story, I need to tell you what actually happens before that story. You see, Jesus was talking to his disciples, and one of his disciples named Peter asked Jesus, Jesus, how many times must I forgive my brother? 7 times? He asked. And Jesus said, no, not 7 times, but 70 times 7. You see, when Peter asked the question, how many times should I forgive my brother? He thought when he said 7, he was being very generous. Because the rabbis back in those days used to say, right, you can forgive your brother once. You can forgive your brother twice. You can forgive your brother on the 3rd occasion. But after that, that was the cutoff point. In other words, 3 strikes and you're out. But so when Peter asked the question, he thought it was being quite generous when he said to Jesus, should I forgive my brother 7 times? But he was really shocked with Jesus' answer. Jesus did not actually say, yes, you're right, you can forgive your brother 7 times. Jesus says, you should forgive your brother 70 times 7. Are you serious? Are you serious? Jesus? Yes, he was. Jesus was serious. And to explain it, he told a story. You find the story in Matthew chapter 18 and verse 21 to 35. There, Jesus says, there was a king who wanted to settle accounts. So I'm thinking it was probably the end of the financial year and he wanted to make sure that his accounts were in order. So he calls his servants and he's looking into the records and he's looking into the books. He's got his accountants and they're looking through the books to make sure that nobody owes the king any money. And then, to their discovery, to their amazement, they find out there's a man or one of the servants who actually owes the king. And guess how much money he owes? He owes 10,000 talents. 10,000 talents. And so the king summons this man, the servant, to come to him so that he comes and settles the account. Now bear in mind, back in those days, when we're talking about talents, that was the weight of money that they used. That was a weight of money, whether it was gold or whether it was silver. And 10,000 talents was equal to 60 million denarii. Denarii was the currency. Now, 60 million denarii, in today's standards, we are talking about at least $1 billion. So here you have a man, a servant, who actually owes the king $1 billion. So don't ask me how he came to owe the king that money, but he owes that money. And he's brought before the king. But then when he's brought before the king, he pleads with the king. He begins to beg the king, "Oh king, have mercy on me, and I will pay you all." But then the king says, "I have mercy on you. I have mercy on you because you begged me." Because think about it, the king was actually going to have him, his wife, his children sent to the debtor's jail. Back in those days, if you couldn't pay a debt, you were put in prison. And so the king was going to have this man put in a debtor's jail. But this man begins to beg the king, And the king has mercy on him. And the king forgives him his debt. 60 million denarii in those days, over what, $1 billion forgiven. Now, imagine if you had been forgiven $1 billion. Or let's think about it. Let's put it another way. Imagine that one day, you get up in the morning and as you get ready to go to work, you get a phone call. And the phone call says, this is actually a lawyer from one of the firms, local firms, and it says that, your great aunt has left you $1 billion. $1 billion. Like $1 billion, your great aunt has left you $1 billion. How are you going to respond? Well, I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll start singing. I'll start singing Amazing Grace, how sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me. I once was lost, but now I'm found. It's exciting. And this is exactly how the servant felt. He was so excited that he had been forgiven $1 billion. But what fascinates me about the story is that this servant actually said to the king, King, you know what? I'm actually going to pay you back the money. Before he was forgiven, that's what he said. He said to the king, King, have mercy on me and I'll pay you back all the money I owe you. But that was a joke. That was a joke because how was he going to be able to pay back $1 billion? If you did the calculation back in those days, if you actually try to look at the figures, it was probably going to take him 164,000 years to be able to pay that money. So in other words, even 1 lifetime, 2 lifetimes, 3 lifetimes, 4 lifetimes, 5 lifetimes was not going to be enough to settle that debt. Friends, we have a debt that we owe to God. In Romans chapter 3, verse 23, there it says, for the wages of sin is death. We've sinned against God. We've sinned against God, and that is a debt that we could never repay. But in the same book of Romans chapter 6, verse 23, there it says, for the wages of sin is death, but the gift of God is eternal life through Christ Jesus our Lord. Romans chapter 6, verse 23. And then the first one is Romans chapter 3, verse 23. And so there you can see that God gives us this gift of Christ because our sin was a debt that we could never repay. But Christ, in his mercy, gave his life for us so that we could be free from that debt. That debt was paid by Christ. And so when this servant says that, have mercy on me and I'll pay you back all that I owe, he was never going to be able to pay that debt. Friends, we can never repay what Christ has done for us. If we were to live a perfect life and submit that perfect life to God as a basis on which you should get into heaven, it will be considered as treason. The price that Jesus paid for us is more than we can ever imagine. And so going back to the story then takes on a different twist. Whilst this servant is singing Amazing Grace, he says that he exits the king's presence. He leaves the king's presence, and as he goes, he finds another servant, a fellow servant. And this fellow servant owed him 100 denarii. 100 denarii. And it says he holds the servant by the throat. He chokes the servant, his fellow servant, and demands the money. Isn't it interesting? He demands the money. He holds and chokes the servant and says, pay me back my money. And I wonder if we do that sometimes, we leave church on Sunday morning and then on Monday we're holding people by the throat, asking them to pay us what they owe us. And so he holds his servant by the throat, and this fellow servant says, oh, please, have mercy on me, and I'll pay you back all. Be patient with me, and I'll pay you back all. the same expression, the same words, the same plea that he had offered to the king. The king forgave him, but he would not let his fellow servant go. He holds him by the throat and has him thrown into jail, into prison, until he can pay back all that he owes him. Friends, this is what you call forgiveness gone sour. Forgiveness gone sour. This is the man who has just experienced forgiveness. This is the man who has been freed a debt which he could never repay. And yet, he's demanding that somebody pays him a little debt. Going back to the illustration I used earlier about your great aunt who had left you $1 billion. Now imagine if your great aunt had left you $1 billion. And then, you know, my friend here, Henry, owes me $5. I'll tell you what, after receiving $1 billion, I'll say, Henry, you know what? Keep the $5. I'll give you more. But no, he doesn't do that. He holds him by the throat and has him thrown in jail. And friends, I wonder if we're like that sometimes. Grace on Sunday, justice, demanding justice on Monday. And so, it looks like there were spies around, because whilst he had his hand on his fellow servant's throat, it says that there were fellow servants around who saw what was happening and then went to the king and told the king what the servant had done. And so the king then summons the servant and says to him, "You wicked servant, did I not forgive you $1 billion earlier? Should you not also have had compassion on your fellow servant and forgiven your fellow servant just as I had forgiven you?" The king wasn't happy. And he says that he had this servant thrown into jail until he could pay all that he owed. Now, did I tell you that the servant is still in jail? Because remember, it was 164 years he had to work to pay that money. So he's still in jail now. The king had him thrown in jail. The king had him thrown into prison. And as I'm speaking, I ask myself, do we as Christians, or do we as people in general, find ourselves in prison sometimes? And I can say yes. You see, when we fail to forgive others the hurt that they've done to us, we are imprisoning ourselves. The story is told of two men who were prisoners of war during the American Vietnam War. And it says that these prisoners of war were being held by the Vietnamese, and they were actually held in bamboo cages. The cages were not that high, it was about 4 feet high, and they were tortured and they were kept in there. They were not even allowed to stretch. However, occasionally when they were in good behavior, they'll be let out of the cages and they'll be allowed to stretch. They were tortured and they suffered. 25 years later, fast forward, the war has ended. America has built a monument, a memorial for the prisoners of war and all the soldiers who actually went to war. And so they have all the soldiers and their names are etched in stone. And these two prisoners of war are standing there next to each other, gazing at the monument. And then one turns to the other and says to him, "Have you forgiven your captors yet?" And the other responds, "No, I will never forgive. I will never, ever forgive. I still have pain. I still have nightmares of the tortures that we experienced. I will never forgive." His friend turns to him and said to him, "Well, I guess then you're still a prisoner, aren't you?" Friends, we make ourselves prisoners when we fail to forgive others. We become imprisoned by resentment, imprisoned by wanting to take revenge, imprisoned by our bitterness. We find ourselves imprisoned when we fail to forgive others. And so who is it that you need to forgive in your life? Who is it that you need to reach out to and say, you know what happened to me was really bad, but I choose to forgive. Because you see, holding on to bitterness and not forgiving others is, as somebody says, it's like taking rat poison and expecting the other person to die. We hurt ourselves when we fail to forgive. Now, Dr. Henry just shared with us about cancer, and we learned a lot about some of the causes of cancer. But as he would later maybe mention that he would let you know that the medical industry also tell us that failure to forgive, research says, is one of the reasons why sometimes people find it difficult to heal when they're suffering from disease. There's a lady who's written a book, and the title of the book you might not find very amusing, but what she says is that the title of the book is The Real Meaning of the F Word. And what she says is quite true. It's her name is Clara. Clara Norm says she met a lady named Zuri. Now Zuri was suffering from cancer. She had been diagnosed with cancer and was undergoing treatment. And they met at a conference where shares was sharing. And they became friends and they started talking. And the treatment that Zuri was undergoing, it seemed it wasn't really helping. And then they began talking. She discovered that Zuri had not forgiven her mother, who had made her feel unloved. And so they started working through that issue of non-forgiveness or unforgiveness, and they started working through that issue. And would you believe it? When she was able to forgive her mother and they were able to reconcile, she went into remission. So there's evidence. There's evidence to suggest that, holding on to unforgiveness and not forgiving others who've hurt us could actually prolong our healing and make it difficult for us to be healed. And so I'd like to share with you, I'd like to say to you, if you're struggling to forgive, then we need to go to Jesus. Because Jesus did not struggle to forgive us. He was willing to go to the cross. He was nailed to the cross so that we could experience forgiveness. And so I think I'll end there because otherwise I'm taking all the time. So Dr. Henry, over to you. And I hope that this thought will stay with us and will extend the same forgiveness that we have received from Christ.
That's great. Thank you, Pastor Kojo. We'll also give a bit of time now for the people who are online, whether you're on Facebook or any other social media means, to be able to submit some questions. And we'll be monitoring these questions as they come up online and spend a bit of time to go through them as well. Now, before we go through the questions though, Pastor Kojo, in the process of treating people with cancer, I do meet people who are going through a whole range of different emotions, and they really are very reflective in this part of their life because they think about the things they've done, the things they achieved, but it also comes to focus the things that the times maybe where they've wronged somebody or whether they've done something or there's some sort of barrier between them and another family member or another friend. Often these people find that they don't really have the courage to take the step to do something, to forgive. What do you recommend is a good first step or maybe first couple of steps to try to rebuild a broken relationship through forgiveness?
That's a very good question, Henry. And I'm going to say that the quote that I shared at the beginning from George Herbert, saying that, basically, if we fail to forgive, then we're basically breaking the bridge over which we must cross ourselves. It could be interpreted as that, we need to realize that we also need forgiveness. And if we're not able to extend that forgiveness, then if we're not able to extend that forgiveness, then how can we then expect to be forgiven? I remember, I think it's Merchant of Venice, where Shakespeare says, "How shall you hope for mercy? Rendering none." So obviously, we need to know that we need to extend forgiveness in order to make it possible for us to forgive as well. But as a first step, I think instead of dwelling on what people have done to us to hurt us, let us rather focus on the forgiveness that we have received from God, which is available to all people. So this is what I'll say. Extending that forgiveness, recognizing that God has forgiven us, and then embracing God's forgiveness that allows us to be able to forgive others as well.
Okay. The other part I really liked about your talk is about how on Sunday or on the weekend we experience the grace of God, or we're in a different kind of mode, and then on Monday we really want that justice. And I find it's such a tough balance sometimes between wanting justice, wanting people to really understand or know what they've done wrong, and to have some kind of recognition of that. But in actual fact, having forgiveness is just probably even a more powerful way that the other party can recognize the wrong that they've done. Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, sure. Forgiveness is really powerful. I had a story, I can't remember all the details, but this was during the tension in South Africa, apartheid. And when they went through, when apartheid was over and they went through the Truth and Reconciliation Commission, chaired by, Desmond Tutu, they went through that. I think there was a lady whose either husband or son was killed. And the policeman who actually killed this lady's son or husband had to basically tell what happened. And in the lady's presence, and after this policeman told the truth, he was overwhelmed with the lady's response. The lady said to him that, I forgive you. Not only that, I have a lot of love to give.
Wow.
And I want to, let you know that I love you.
Yes.
Would you believe that the man actually passed out?
Wow.
Because he was just overwhelmed with the forgiveness. And I think that's what it is. We underestimate the power that forgiveness has. We experience it in our lives. When somebody forgives us, we know we've done the wrong thing, and somebody forgives us. How does that make us feel?
Yeah.
It is powerful. And I always refer to God's grace and God's love and God's forgiveness for us. It should make us really appreciative.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, and I'm also like the part of your talk when you talked about the how it can affect your healing as well. And I talked in my talk a bit about the effect that the mental aspect to healing, and no doubt having forgiveness or experiencing the grace of God in the spiritual component can actually have a very positive effect on healing. And there are studies that are only just coming out about the effect of spirituality, particularly in cancer and in healing of the body. And I'll be very interested to see how some of these play out in the future as well. Now, we do have a few questions that are coming through. And please, we've still got another 10 minutes of this talk. And we still encourage those who are viewing us online to still submit your questions, and we can go through them as well. Now, we are going to go through some of the questions. We have one from Aaron. He says, should cancer patients avoid taking antioxidants during chemotherapy? Would antioxidants counteract or reduce the effects of chemotherapy? Now, that is a really good question, actually. And people often ask about not only antioxidants, but many types of medications that may interact with cancer treatment. Now, the first thing to understand is that chemotherapy is administered by medical professionals, and it is very closely monitored at multiple times during the treatment. Beforehand, patients are given a lot of information about what to expect. And during the chemotherapy, at all stages, there are nurses and there are doctors that will monitor the effects of the chemotherapy, particularly on other parts of the body. And there are also many opportunities during this time to ask questions about medications. Some of them are likely to interact, others are not. And also chemotherapy is generally given usually in short bursts, as in usually only in 1 day or a few weeks treatment with a rest period to allow the body to recover. So because of that, Certain types of medications, they can interact maybe during the intensive phase of treatment, but maybe not so during the rest or recovery phases of the treatment. So therefore, it's important to discuss all medications with your medical professional, your oncologist, or anyone who's involved in the treatment, and they'll direct you to who the best person to ask. Antioxidants themselves, though, are not known to be harmful, particularly many types of antioxidants are. Some of these can interact or maybe slightly lessen the effect of some chemotherapy agents, but the majority of them are unlikely to, or they can be taken in the recovery phase when the body is recovering from the chemotherapy that has recently been given. So I would just recommend, just as a summary, I would recommend that you discuss this with your medical professional about the antioxidant, the exact name and type. It's important to bring it in and bring in the actual box or the ingredients that are within the agent. Then the oncologist can advise you about whether this can be taken in whatever phase. But generally speaking, though, they would be safe, particularly in the rest period, and in actual fact might be able to enhance the recovery time in as you're going through chemotherapy. So yeah, so that's a very good question, and we'll be able to hopefully have other questions related to medication and treatment as well. Now, there's another question for you, Pastor Kojo, that I've just seen now as well. Can a failure to forgive, this is submitted online as well by Joe, can failure to forgive be a type of spiritual cancer that can consume us? Now, I've talked about cancer being something that can take over the whole body and overwhelm the body to such a way that it can allow that the body just can't handle anymore. Can failure to forgive have this kind of effect spiritually on someone?
Yeah, thank you, Joe, for that question. I think yes, it can, because you think about it when you basically you feel really hard done by, you feel like somebody's really upset you, and you hold on to it. When you hold on to it, this is what happens. You transfer that hatred and that anger on somebody else who might be innocent. So basically you're upset by something that somebody did. You go to the shop, and then you take it out on the what is it?
The shopkeeper.
The shopkeeper.
Poor shopkeeper.
And this is what we do oftentimes, and so then it begins to affect all your relationships. So I guess that's more like it. That's like cancer. It spreads out, and then you become bitter, and then the worst is you're not able to receive the forgiveness that Christ is offering. Because remember, like the story that we just shared, there it actually says that this king did not forgive the servant. He had him thrown, the wicked servant thrown into jail. And if you read in Matthew chapter 6, verse 14, Jesus makes it very clear. If we do not forgive others their trespasses, neither will our Father in heaven forgive us our trespasses. So we actually do not experience God's forgiveness if we do not extend forgiveness to others. So obviously it is a very serious spiritual issue, just like cancer is a very serious medical issue. So it can affect all our relationships, and so it is important that we extend forgiveness to all. Yeah. I give you there's a text here, maybe I can read if you don't mind, Joe. One of the texts that you find probably very helpful is Ephesians chapter 4 and verse 32. It says, "Be kind to one another, tender-hearted, forgiving one another, as God in Christ forgave you."
Now we just have another comment on online as well from Susie. She says that failure to forgive actually takes lots of attention from us, so we may miss the chance that can focus on God's blessing. And I think that is true. When we fail to forgive, we're so consumed by it. And God has given us so many other blessings in our life that we just miss them. We just go straight past them because we're so consumed by the hurt and the anger that we have.
Yeah, that's so true. That's why we have to count our blessings every day. There's so much God has done for us. And, you can't go through life without being, somebody stepping in your toe at some point. So if you're going to make a big issue out of it and forget all the blessings that God has given us, then we're selling ourselves short.
Yeah, we sure are. Also, in the talk as well, particularly in patients that are going through cancer treatments, a lot of it is about preparation, that the cancer treatments are generally intensive, they are in short periods of time, but we need to prepare ourselves before and recover afterwards. And I think there's a bit of spiritual lesson in this as well, isn't there? That sometimes when we go through forgiveness, we need to prepare ourselves for forgiving others by focusing on God's blessing, being open to spiritual thoughts and maybe God's direction. And then afterwards, do you find that there is a healing phase or recovery phase after we forgive someone? Can you talk a bit about that?
Yeah, so oftentimes, when we talk about forgiveness, we expect that, we're going to just go out and just forgive people and then it's all well and good with us. Some of the hurts that we've experienced is real and it does hurt. And just as, when people are, have a disease or they are hurt, physical ailment or whatever it is, it takes a while to recover. And I think it's in the same way, forgiveness, we give it to God, ask God to help us to forgive, but then healing, it takes time to heal sometimes. And God is the one who brings, healing to us.
Yeah. Okay.
It says, can I just say that it says in Isaiah chapter 53, it says, by his stripes, we are healed, talking about Jesus. So he brings healing to us.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay, and we also have a question from Grace, also online as well. From medical perspective, how can the cancer chain be broken from a genetically inherited? Now, this is a very important question. It's a question that I often get asked. So in my line of work, I also deal with patients that have a genetic predisposition for cancer. In my line of work, it's mainly breast cancer. So I meet family groups that have a higher rate of cancer within their family. And I guess the question is it possible that some patients can avoid cancer even though they're at higher risk? Now, the genetic component for cancer is one that in some families can be quite strong, but it's not always absolute. There are many people who might have a genetic predisposition to cancer, but doesn't necessarily mean they're going to get it. And they can do certain things to prevent cancer in their life by staying healthy, by having a good lifestyle, but importantly, which leads to our next week's talk, is by being involved in a surveillance program or looking out for the early signs of cancer. In some patients, though, it is inevitable, though, that sometimes their risk for cancer and certain genetic faults means that they have almost an absolute risk of developing cancer sometime in their life. But that doesn't mean that the cancer is not treatable, though. And the earlier phase that we can get it, the more likely it is going to be that their treatments are going to be effective. Other than that, though, unfortunately, a lot of genetic things are inherited and those risks do remain lifelong. But fortunately, there are many things that we can do to avoid cancer or at least pick it up at the earliest stage. And always to bring it back to something spiritual as well during online church is that sometimes people are going to wrong us, that is also going to be inevitable as well. But even if people wrong us, there might be ways and means or tools that we can to deal with it. Yeah.
I think that's a good way to end this. And why don't we pray about this and ask God to help us to forgive.
Okay, that's great.
Our Father and our God, we thank you so much for being with us. And Lord, we pray that you would help us to experience your forgiveness, to understand your forgiveness, so that we can extend our forgiveness to others. We pray for anyone who is struggling to forgive, that you give them the power and help them to understand and appreciate your forgiveness so that they can extend it to others. We thank you for Jesus and his sacrifice. And we thank you for all that you've done for us. In Jesus' name we pray. Amen.
Amen. Thank you so much to you, Pastor Kojo. Thank you also for our online viewers as well. And we look forward to next week. So next week, both myself and Pastor Kojo will be together again. We'll be sharing about cancer prevention and also cancer early detection or cancer surveillance. So we're going to be talking about those topics. And I'm sure that your spiritual talk will also be exciting as well. So we look forward to that as well. So thank you for joining us this morning and have a great morning.